Prince Henry is my homeboy.
Why is he your homeboy? Did he even do anything special?
Yeah, he was the richest explorer in the world during the 1400s. He sailed across Africa and was largely responsible for Portugal's interest in exploration. The Portuguese also hoped to find a way to the rich spice trade of the Indies. His nickname is Henry the Navigator because of his improvement and work with scientists and help of the magnetic compass and the astrolabe, which helped to direct sailors on voyages.
Vasco da Gama. He sailed eastward across the Indian Ocean. He traveled with Bartholomew Diaz and reached the southern tip of Africa, which was named Cape of Good Hope later in 1488. He made a second voyage to India several years later. He crossed the Indian Ocean on May 20th, 1498, in 23 days. Da Gama set out with 4 ships from his homeland in Portugal. 10 months later, he and his men arrived in Calicut, India. Here they established ties with the leaders of the city and attempted to set up a trading partnership. While their efforts to set up a partnership with Indian traders was not successful, they did prove once and for all that moving goods over the sea was possible. Vasco da Gama and his men returned to Portugal as heroes.
The slave trade. At first, the Europeans tried trading the natives for slaves, but that didn't work out because those people were dying out from disease, and there was also the problem of enslaving people on their own land. The slave trade grew quickly when the Portuguese set up sugar plantations off the coast of Africa. The slave trade in the Atlantic was part of a system known as the triangular trade. First, merchants shipped cotton goods, weapons, and liquor to Africa in exchange for slaves or gold. The shipment of slaves across the Atlantic and the Americas was known as the Middle Passage. The Middle Passage was brutal and degrading to kidnapped African people. The Middle Passage consisted of 1 to 6 months, depending on the weather conditions. The slaves were packed tight and chained down to the floor on the ship, and they were barely allowed to move for the entire time. The slaves were only given 1 small meal a day, and if food was short, they did not get to eat at all. Many slaves became too depressed to eat or function efficiently because of the loss of freedom, family, security, and their own humanity. Many slaves committed suicide, either by starving themselves to death or throwing themselves overboard. Healthy slaves equal valuable slaves, so when the slaves didn't eat, they were punished harshly.
The Treaty of Tordesillas, treaty between Spain and Portugal that moved the line farther west. This soon had an important impact. It was made to settle the contentious matter of the possession of the newly discovered lands of the non-Christian world between Portugal and Spain. The Treaty of Tordesillas moved the demarcation line to a circle passing 370 leagues west of Cape Verde Islands, and thus set the legal base for colonization of the eastern coast of the land now known as Brazil. America, America, God shed his grace on thee. Amerigo Vespucci was an Italian navigator. Between 1497 and 1504, he crossed the Atlantic several times as part of Spanish and Portuguese expeditions. When he reached the land, he didn't think that the land he saw was a part of Asia. He called the land the New World. A German mapmaker who was impressed with Amerigo called the land America after Vespucci. Vasco Núñez de Balboa. Vasco made an overland crossing of the Isthmus of Panama. His discovery made it clear that the New World was not a part of Asia. He was the discoverer of the Pacific Ocean. He was the best of explorers. When he came over to America, he was only 17. Balboa and his partner, Rodrigo de Bastidas, explored the coastline of South America in search of treasure. Balboa married Maria de Penalosa in spite of one key fact. She was in a convent in Spain at the time, and they had to marry by proxy. By 1500 AD, he set sail from Spain, arriving in Colombia, South America, several months later.
Christopher Columbus. He was an explorer who thought he found a new route to Asia, but in all reality, he found the New World, aka America. He studied the writings of Marco Polo and Ptolemy's description of a round earth to create this route. He left for this journey in August of 1492 from Palos, Spain. This voyage was approved by Queen Isabella after 6 years of him asking. The names of the ships he sailed in were the Pinta, the Nina, and the Santa Maria. On Christmas Eve, Christopher Columbus allowed an experienced boy to steer the Santa Maria, and later that night the ship crashed onto a reef near Hispaniola. Only the Nina and the Pinta would return to Spain after that. Even though he made 3 return trips west, Christopher Columbus never actually set foot on the mainland of North America. The Columbian Exchange was named after Christopher Columbus. This is an interaction in which products, plants, animals, and even diseases traveled between the western and eastern hemispheres.
Ferdinand Magellan. Ferdinand Magellan was a Portuguese navigator who proved Balboa was correct about how the New World was not a part of Asia. Interesting fact, he was the Majesty's faithful attendant at age 13, and he was also able to convince a teenage king that some of the Spice Islands were in some undiscovered world so he could travel there, which they were discovered, unfortunately. He was the first explorer to lead an expedition around the world. That expedition was the Victoria. On the journey, Magellan named the Pacific Ocean, which means calm and peaceful. He sailed westward across the Pacific and reached the Philippine Islands. Those are cool. Ferdinand died by a poisoned arrow in the foot in the Philippines on April 17th, 1521.
The Portuguese Empire weakens. The great and powerful Portuguese Empire declined almost as rapidly as it had grown. This occurred since the government did not have the financial wealth to support such an empire. It was too intense. They needed thousands of sailors and soldiers to maintain and expand the empire, but none of them ever returned from sea. There were battles and lives that were lost, and since the Portuguese population was too small, they couldn't replace them. This resulted in a suffering loss of exploration and colonization. In 1580, Spain finally annexed Portugal, and Portugal did not regain its independence until 1640. From all of this, only Brazil and Angola survived as major Portuguese colonies.